No. Okay. Also, we ask that you please keep your microphones on mute until we get to the Q&A section. That's pretty much it for me. And so, Judy, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. And first of all, thank Danielle and everyone at our branch of the Public Library for sponsoring these monthly. We're going to have a few more this spring, winter and spring, a few more programs. And our library is now fully open and the kids are coming back and the programs are on. So at some point we may have in branch programs, but at the moment we're still doing everything on Zoom. And it's really fun this evening to welcome Rosemary. And in a little while, we'll be speaking with Amanda Mathews. Rosemary Brown is a London-based journalist and author of Following Nellie Bly, her round-the-world record-breaking world, when she retraced Bly's epic global journey to pay tribute to this trailblazing woman, now commemorated in the recently inaugurated Girl Puzzle on Roosevelt Island. She is a fellow of the Royal Geographic Society, intent on celebrating the forgotten achievements of women adventurers, which led her to help to organize the first Heritage of Women in Exploration conference in London. Rosemary was born in Canada, grew up in America, where she studied journalism at the University of Florida before moving to London. She has later lived in Washington, D.C. and Paris, and has strong connections to France. So her articles have appeared in publications including Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, France Magazine, The Guardian, and Inside History. Following work as a reporter, Rosemary moved to the charity sector as a journalist for organizations including Green America, Save the Children, the Rainforest Foundation, with a focus on global development, the environment, and human rights. She was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2019 to research pioneering initiatives in Greece and Ireland to welcome refugees and help them reintegrate into their new countries. She currently volunteers with 3 charities that support asylum seekers and refugees arriving in the United Kingdom. Nellie Bly has kept her busy for years, but Rosemary is now researching the travels of Cecilia Fiennes, who traveled 5,000 miles on horseback to every country and county in England between 1684 and 1712. Well, Rosemary, I think we have to dismount the horse at this point.
Yes.
Get off the train, get off the ship, and away anchor so we can welcome you to a little island in the middle of the East River and tell us about Nellie Bly. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you very much. What a
You're
lovely
welcome.
introduction. And thank you, Judith, and thank you, Daniel, for looking after us. And thank you, everybody that's here tonight to hear the story of Nellie Bly and celebrate the centennial of her death. We're not going to be sad, we're going to be happy, and we're going to remember all the amazing things she did. So now it's time to share the screen. Okay, can you see? A-okay?
Yes.
Well, as I said, hello from London to everybody. It's great to see so many faces. Crusading journalist and adventurer Nellie Bly jumped off the computer screen at me. She appeared as I was researching Victorian women explorers, and she wouldn't go away. And she still hasn't. And that's why I'm here with you this evening. The more I got to know her, the more I was intrigued by this spirited woman who would never take no for an answer, despite living in a world where women knew their place. Nellie Bly knew her place all right, smack dab on the front page of the world's newspapers. It's 132 years since Nellie Bly raced through a man's world alone and literally with the clothes on her back to beat the fictional record set by Jules Verne's Phileas Fogg in Around the World in 80 Days. 72 days later, she broke the record for the fastest trip around the world and became a global celebrity. In celebration of the remarkable Nellie Bly and her amazing journey, I followed in her footsteps around the world on the 125th anniversary of her voyage. In reblazing her global trail, my goal was to get her back on the map, back on the front page. In an era when synthetic celebrities vie for our adoration, I felt we needed a genuine heroine to look up to, somebody who defied convention, achieved the impossible, and championed society's most vulnerable people. But first, a little more about Nellie Bly. She was born Elizabeth Jane Cochran in 1864 in Cochran Mills, Pennsylvania. You can see her childhood home on the top left. It's left for me, it might be right for you. So this is Cochran Mills, Pennsylvania. And her childhood was spent in nearby Apollo on the right. And you'll see that there's a landmark sign in front of the house. She grew up in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Nellie Bly was her pen name or nom de plume because female journalists could not write under their legal name in her era. Nellie was the 13th of 15 children in a family headed by Michael Cochran, and he's there on the screen, a mill owner and county judge. She was only 6 years old when her beloved father died without warning and without a will, which plunged his once wealthy and respected family into poverty. They were forced from their mansion in Apollo and eventually moved almost penniless to Pittsburgh. The indignity borne by her family forged a determination in Nellie to triumph over tragedy and fight for justice, especially for the most vulnerable. With that searing sense of justice, Nellie thrust open doors that were usually closed to women. Her journalism career was launched after an outraged Nellie, only 19 years old, wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh Dispatch lambasting a column claiming that women belonged at home and certainly not in the workplace. The furious letter attracted the editor's eye and he hired Nellie as a reporter. Her first published piece was called The Girl Puzzle, namesake for the installation we will hear more about from Amanda. By 1887, she had worked her way up to the New York World, owned by Joseph Pulitzer of the Pulitzer Prize. It was one of the most successful newspapers of its time. In her first and most astonishing assignment, she convinced authorities that she was crazy and spent 10 days inside the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island, now Roosevelt Island. Positively demented, I consider it a hopeless case, said the doctor who committed Nellie to the asylum. His shocking verdict condemned Nellie and countless other women to freezing baths in filthy water, putrid meals, relentless taunting from cruel nurses, and beatings that drew blood and bruises. Nellie's accounts and her book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, unleashed sweeping reforms. This was the dawn of investigative journalism, and Nellie Bly was its pioneer. Her exposés brought much acclaim, and indeed, in my view, they are her crowning glory. But the story that would make her the most famous woman in the world is the one I'm going to tell you about this evening. A world trip aimed at beating the 80 days it took Phileas Fogg to traverse the globe was Nellie's idea. When she presented it to her editor, he said, great idea, but we'll have to send a man because you would need a chaperone and you'd have to take too many trunks. Nellie said, fine, send the man. I'm going to the competing paper and let's just see who'll win. Well, they had to give in because they knew she would win, but it took them more than a year to say, yes, go. And then they said, Nellie, can you start around the world the day after tomorrow? And Nellie said, I can start around the world this minute. There wasn't even time for her to get a proper passport, but there was time for her to do a few other things. So she literally traveled with the clothes on her back and the few items she could squeeze into her grip sack, what we call here in England a Gladstone bag. It measured 16 by 7 inches, and I've got a replica up here you might see on my shelf afterwards. But I think that I also traveled light. I had a carry-on bag and lightweight trekking clothes. Nellie did not take a camera, which was one of her greatest regrets, but I did. So I can share my photos with you tonight. But as many of our audience are from New York or who know New York very well, before we get started on Nellie Bly's whirlwind travels, I'd like to share some of her footsteps in New York City. And Sally, who's here this evening, helped me map out where I could find these places in New York from the sunroom on the top of the Cosmopolitan Club. So I like to call this Nellie's Footsteps in New York City. Most of the newspaper offices were in Printing House Square, which is Park Row is there, but not many of the newspaper offices are left. And you'll all recognize this was the part of the insane asylum, which is now called the Octagon Tower. And this is where Nellie Bly went undercover on Roosevelt Island. In order to prove that she could do the trip in less than 80 days, she went straight to Steamboat Row, which was down on Battery Place, and visited all of the shipping companies and got their timetables, did the math, and felt that she could do it in 75 days. So some people, you won't recognize these buildings, but if you go down to the same location, you will find remnants of the steamship offices. You'll see it in doorways that say cabin class or first class. You'll see it in ornaments around buildings. You'll see it in etchings on doors down by Battery. Then over here, she commissioned her outfit. She gave Mr. Gormley, 1 day, 24 hours to get it done. And this was a very posh dress shop because the year before, President Harrison, his wife, had her gown made by Gormley. But Gormley, he did it. He did it in 24 hours, which was also something impossible. And then the last picture is it's the Hotel McAlpin. It's now Herald Towers, but that's where she spent her last years. So now we're going to follow her around the world. When she boarded the transatlantic steamship, the SS Augusta Victoria, on the 14th of November, 1889, Nellie Bly had never sailed before. 8 days later, after surviving raging seas, she was in Southampton, England. So here's the port at the time in Hoboken when Nellie used it, and here it is today on the bottom. And so I retraced those steps and tried to imagine her as she was actually quite nervous about the trip despite her bravado. So it was very exciting to be in Hoboken, New Jersey. From Hoboken, she said, as I said, she sailed to Southampton. When she arrived in Southampton, she caught the mail train to London's Waterloo Station, and she arrived there at 5 in the morning. She had just 4 hours to obtain an official passport from the American legation that we would call an embassy now. to visit the world newspaper London office to pick up telegrams, and to get herself to the Pacific and Orient head office to buy tickets covering half of her world journey. She did it, just. You can see the former P&O offices along with the navigation sculpture, which is a single remaining souvenir of the offices that are now replaced by London's soaring steel and glass Leadenhall building. Nellie was only 8 days into the race when she discovered that Jules Verne, the author who had inspired her own voyage, had invited her to his home in Amiens, France. This time-guzzling 180-mile deviation threatened her success from the very start, and it meant 2 nights without sleep. But she couldn't resist. She took the risk. Nellie, Jules, and Honorine Verne, and you might be able to see their dog Follette in the first picture, became instant friends despite the language barrier. They just connected, and the Vernes followed her journey the entire, then it would have been about 65 days until she got back to New York City, to Jersey City. So they were, it was a huge risk to take, but it really paid off. And her visit today, her visit lives on at the Maison Jules Verne, which is a museum, a beautiful international house museum open to the public. And you can find pictures of her, you can find passages of what she wrote in her own book, which was Around the World in 72 Days, are in the house. So for that, visiting there was very, very exciting for me. Nellie traveled on to Italy, Egypt, and Aden, which is Yemen. I was not able to go to Egypt or Yemen due to Foreign Office constraints that meant that they felt it was too dangerous. But I did catch up with her in Ceylon in Sri Lanka, where she was the first one ashore after many days on a steamship. She was fed up. She didn't want to wait for the launch, so she hopped on a catamaran and sailed through on the catamaran to the harbor, got off, and she was the first in line to get a room at the Grand Oriental Hotel, which you'll see on the left. In the end, she did not need to rush because she was delayed 5 days in Ceylon or Sri Lanka. While she was there, she visited temples. She relaxed in colonial hotels like the Gull Face and the Mount Lavinia, and she took a day trip into the hill country, and so did I. The Grand Oriental Hotel was the only hotel in her entire trip that is still standing, and the only hotel that I could stay in that she has stayed in as well. It's a shadow of its former self, but it is still standing, and I understand that in 2021, they restored it even more. So my goal is to get a plaque in the lobby saying that Nellie Bly stayed there. Now we're halfway around the world. When Nellie Bly reached Singapore on December 18th, 1889, she was halfway around the world and at the southernmost tip of her journey. In Singapore, I was keen to find the Hindu temple who had refused admission to Nellie all those years ago. I wanted to make up for it, and I wanted to visit myself for her. But Nellie was incensed when they wouldn't let her visit the temple. She said, "Why? Curious to know why my sex and heathen land should exclude me from a temple, as in America, it confines me to the side entrance of hotels and other strange and incommodious things." That's a quote from Nellie. "My comrades were told that removing their shoes would give them admission, but I should be denied that privilege because I was a woman." Well, I spent the afternoon temple hopping in Singapore's Little India, which is a wonderful exotic place. only to discover that the temple is gone and is now replaced by a heaving Dhobi Ghat metro station. The moral of the story, don't mess with Nellie Bly. Nellie arrived in Hong Kong with a monsoon. I arrived with a typhoon on the way. Nellie's optimism at arriving in Hong Kong 2 days early ahead of her schedule quickly sunk to despair when she discovered that someone was ahead of her. Elizabeth Bisland, a journalist and author, sent by a competing publication. In fact, it was today's Cosmopolitan magazine back then. The editor there sent Elizabeth Bisland off on the same day, circling the other way around the world. She went from west to east. Nellie went from east to west. Elizabeth had left Hong Kong 3 days earlier, as a ship captain told her, and said, "You'll never win now." But in the end, Nellie held her grit and didn't cry. And in the end, Elizabeth Bisland completed the journey in 76 days, which was still very, very good, as opposed to Nellie Bly's 72 days. But Nellie was not to know that, and she was stuck in Hong Kong for 5 days, waiting passage to Japan. But as in many things, the winner takes all, and we don't often hear about Elizabeth Bisland, but I think she's a heroine as well. Now, racing against the typhoon, I zipped around all the places that I could find that Nellie had been in 1889. Look at Hong Kong in 1890. I mean, you know what it looks like now. So, but getting to all those places was quite difficult with a typhoon on the way. And before I knew it, the typhoon hit full force. It went into level 8 and Hong Kong shut down. I was stuck, and I was really stuck because I was supposed to go to China the next day, and it had taken me forever to get the right to go there, to get my visa, because I worked on human rights in China, and they don't like people that work on human rights. So I was stuck, and I thought, what on earth am I going to do? The rain was coming and the wind was strong. And I thought, planes weren't even flying. The streets were empty, and even the stock exchange stopped trading. I thought, oh, what am I supposed to do? So I asked myself, what would Nellie Bly do? Well, she'd brave the howling winds and rain. So I had to brave the howling winds and rain, and got to the station thinking that there couldn't possibly be any trains, but there were. The trains were running. I was just about ready to congratulate myself for prevailing over the typhoon when I spotted my seatmates. By the way, he was the only other passenger on this intercity express, and how they put the only 2 people on the train together, I don't know, but they were reserved seats. Anyway, I spotted my seatmate's travel bag. It was the spitting image of the small bag that Nellie carried around the world. Even he was shocked when I showed him a photograph of her bag. I have to say, this wasn't to be the only time that Nellie Bly joined me on the journey. And Canton was definitely the most challenging of all my destinations, and hers as well. Canton, which is now known as Guangzhou, totally enthralled Nellie and me. She was entranced with torture and death. On Christmas Day, she visited a leper colony and ate her lunch in the Temple of Death. Those are the only 2 places I couldn't really find. So also I couldn't find the execution ground, but to tell you the truth, I didn't really want to find any of those places. So I'm kind of glad they're long gone. They're underground somewhere. So to the best of my knowledge, they do not exist. But many of Nellie Bly's destinations have long since disappeared or been reclassified with communist approved names. And some were restored for the 2010 Asian Games in Canton, Guangzhou. She called the temple in the upper right corner the Temple of Horrors. So it wasn't easy to trace. Eventually, I found that it is today's Cheng Huang Temple, and it isn't horrible, but the temple she saw was. Nellie described in great detail the workings of the water clock below. It's officially known as the clepsydra of Canton, and it was known as one of the most extraordinary clocks in the world. But I searched for that clock everywhere. I knew where it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be on a city wall, but it was no longer there. And so after several days, I just gave up on finding it until rain drove me inside the ruby red Zenai Tower on the top, built in 1380, and now home to the relics of Canton's 2,000-year-old history. The city's centuries unfold in each of the tower's 5 stories. So I started at the top to gain context of Nellie's time, the late 19th century. On the way down to earlier eras, I stopped dead in my tracks. There it was, Nellie's water clock. It had been saved and transferred to the museum. And there it was right in front of me in all of its ancient glory. I was stunned and I was elated, but I had the inexplicable but very real feeling that I had been led to it. The former American consulate below, that Nellie saw this when she was here in Canton, and it was the first time after many days that she'd seen the American flag flying. It was the first time since she left New York that she saw the American flag. And this is what she said: "This is the most beautiful flag in the world, and I am ready to whip anyone who says it isn't." An English companion, apparently looking longingly at the Union Jack flying above the then British embassy, kept his mouth shut. Okay. Nellie had a 5-day stopover in Japan. She loved Japan and called it Eden. "I found nothing but what delighted the senses while in Eden," she wrote. Nellie stayed at the Grand Hotel, and this is a postcard of it because it no longer exists. Many of the places Nellie visited in Yokohama no longer exist because of the great earthquake of 1923. So I wasn't sure what to do. How would I ever get a sense of her in Yokohama when most of it was wiped out by that disastrous earthquake? So I went to the museum, and a wonderful woman there helped me. We couldn't speak to each other, but she got out all these books of postcards. And so I was able to get a sense of what Nellie had seen when she was there. And if it weren't for that, it would have been a very unsuccessful visit. So here is tea service at the Grand Hotel. Nellie Bly said the Grand Hotel was absolutely spectacular and wonderful, except for the rats. She also traveled to Kamakura, which is about 30 miles outside of Tokyo, to see the great bronze Buddha. He's called Daibutsu, and he's one of Japan's most famous icons. So I visited there too. There were only 2 places in my entire journey where I could be 100% sure that I was standing where Nellie Bly was standing. And one was in Jules Verne's study in Amiens, France. And the second one was right here in this Buddha, because Nellie, when she was there, was able to climb inside the Buddha, take a ladder up to the top to his head, and look out through his eyes on the beautiful countryside, the beautiful surrounding countryside. This Buddha was built in 1250, and he's the size of a 5-story building. You can imagine my delight when I got there to learn that I could also go inside the Buddha. Only to his tummy, though, only to his hollow tummy. There's no more ladder up to his eyes, but I knew that I was in the same spot as Nellie Bly. And as I say, those are the only 2 places I could be sure about that. The great Buddha. And now we're coming to the end. From Japan, Nellie sailed across the Pacific to San Francisco. I flew from Tokyo to New York City. Nellie took trains across America and was cheered by thousands who gathered in their Sunday best at each station. You can see a picture of her at Pittsburgh in the top. Literally thousands of people were getting into the train stations to welcome her back. She stopped in Albuquerque, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. And when she reached Jersey City, a port for New York City, she had won the race. No one had ever gone around the world so fast. 72 days, 6 hours, and 14 seconds. She was a global celebrity. On her victory parade, the streets of New York were choked with people, and windows were filled with faces in the tall buildings lining Broadway. She had achieved the most remarkable of all feats of circumnavigation ever performed by a human being, said the New York World, who also proclaimed her the best known and most widely talked of young woman on earth today. Following her world travels, Nellie went on a speaking tour, but it wasn't really the success she imagined. In 1895, she married millionaire industrialist Robert Livingstone Seaman, age 70. She was 30. She was later named president of her husband's firm, Ironclad Manufacturing Company in Brooklyn, and became one of America's leading women industrialists. She instituted fair pay and well-being benefits for workers. She streamlined the production methods, and she even patented several of her own inventions for the prospering company. Sadly, though, the Ironclad Company was forced to file for bankruptcy in 1911 after company funds were embezzled by employees. Nellie left America for Europe in 1914 and became the first woman reporting from the Eastern Front, Serbia and Austria, in the First World War. Returning to America in 1919, she wrote for the New York Evening Journal, running newspaper campaigns for vulnerable women and abandoned children. She was raising money for them through the newspaper, and she had turned her 2-room suite in the Hotel McAlpin into an office to help vulnerable people. In following Nellie Bly's footsteps in New York, I visited Woodlawn Cemetery, where she is buried, until 1978 in an unmarked grave. It was devastating to learn that Nellie died without enough money to pay for a grave. She was buried with many of the people who died in the pandemic, in the Spanish flu pandemic. I believe that she wasn't really very good with money, but actually she was giving most of it away to people who she felt needed it more than her. So she was, for very many years, buried in an unmarked grave. As you can see, the inscription calls her a famous news reporter, but she's much more than that. She left a great legacy for us. Nellie Bly pioneered investigative journalism, the type of journalism that can change the world. Through her whirlwind journey, she proved that the world was connected. Steam trains and steamships linked cities, countries, and continents. transcontinental railroads in America and in India, and the Suez Canal in Egypt brought far-flung destinations within reach. And she proved that. They didn't know that. She made the world a smaller place, and she made the world a better place. And not to be forgotten, throughout her career, Nellie's reporting gave voices to the voiceless. She challenged oppression wherever she found it. The true culmination of my quest to get Nellie Bly back on the map sent me traveling once again. On the 10th of December, 2021, I returned to New York City's Roosevelt Island. Nellie made history there in 1887 with her newspaper exposés. She did it again last December when the Girl Puzzle, a monumental installation honoring her life and legacy, was unveiled. Named for her first published piece in which she boldly defied discrimination, the monument was dedicated on International Human Rights Day. Her iconic role has at last been acknowledged in this remarkable commemoration designed and created by Amanda Mathews of Prometheus Art. As Amanda likes to say, Nellie Bly told the story of others. Now we will tell hers. Thank you, and over to Amanda. And I'll stop sharing.
Hi, wonderful. Thank you so much. Judy, am I supposed to kick it back to you quickly?
Yeah,
Or do you
well, I
me
want
go
to
on?
introduce you.
Okay.
Okay, with Amanda Mathews. We've become old friends over the last few months, and she's from Louisville, Kentucky, and she earned her BA of Fine Arts and Philosophy from the University of Louisville. And she studied fine arts and architecture in Paris and France. She's been awarded dozens of professional grants and professional awards. And she and her husband, Brad, own Prometheus Foundry, which does every kind of, all kinds of interesting artworks and sculptures and some other very interesting projects. She's working on a few new projects after she spent the last year outdoors on Roosevelt Island. And it's my pleasure to introduce Amanda Mathews. Amanda?
Let's see. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen. Hoping that, okay. Can somebody let me know what you can see?
Can see the girl
Is the screen
puzzle.
shared? Wonderful. So we had some delays in this. I'm going to run through this because I don't want us to lose the opportunity to have question and answers. The girl puzzle. These are the faces of the women represented in the girl puzzle. This is in the studio when they were still in play. So we'll begin kind of at the beginning. Nellie Bly talks about who we are. Who am I? This is who I am. This is what's not in my bio or my resume. I'm a mother of 2 daughters. I own a farm, live on a farm in Lexington, Kentucky. We have pet horses and ducks and dogs. My parents have been married for 57 years. You know, these are the things, these are the categories in which, you know, we place ourselves. This is where we place our love and our attention. Also not mentioned in the bio is, you know, I understand the steep climb. I felt like I understood part of Nellie Bly from the very beginning. I understood the steep climb of working in a male-dominated industry. And when I was 4.5 months pregnant, I lost my job as a public speaker due to gender discrimination. And had to start over, you know, that climb again. So what I found from Nellie Bly is that our perspective comes from our experiences and our categories. And I definitely want to recognize that I have privilege. I'm a woman, but I'm a white woman. I'm one of the middle children in my family. I grew up in a very small town in the rural South called Mount Washington, Kentucky, but we lived above the poverty line. And as a single mother, I couldn't say the same for my own children. I am also still a woman working in an overwhelmingly male industry and in the public realm. I'm hoping that this is you all can see these the slides as they're changing. So the inspiration for my work, I am inspired to share our history and our shared history where we intersect and overlap. A common thread in my work, a common theme is the fight for survival. And everyone has their own opinion and feeling about what it means to have a fight for survival. To many, it's financial, but to others, it's mental and emotional. I like to look at who has been afforded rights and who is still fighting for them. And I always say that poverty is not just a lack of financial resources, it's a lack of options. I'm inspired to change the anemic scholarship of the past regarding public art in America. And this monument gave me an opportunity to think about what is the language of our monuments in the United States. Public art has many iterations. I'm specifically talking about public art monuments. And at least for us here in the United States, monuments are historically erected to commemorate a famous or notable person or an event, but they also express power and achievement and dominance in war and in competition. So when the Girl Puzzle Monument was unveiled, NBC News interviewed Paul Farber. He's with the Monument Lab. They had just completed the National Monument audit, and they determined that of the top 50 people honored with statuary in the United States, only 3 of them were female. And he also found that of those top 50, there were also only 3 who were non-white males. So of the top 50 people commemorated with statuary, 44 of them were white men. There we go. So basically, the anemic scholarship of public art, what is central to our public art, and why does this pertain to someone like Nellie Bly? Because she looked at what was central to her society and decided that some things needed to change. So central to our public art is this colonialist history of a capitalist patriarchy. There's a lot of homogenization, which you just saw with 44 of the 50 being white men. And then the static nature of our monuments and the permanence of the placement. So what should change? This pertains directly to Nellie Bly. Representation matters, community matters. A decentralization of what has been central is what must happen. We must tell other people's stories to reveal a fuller history of the melting pot that is America and that reflects our communities. And we must expand accessibility. So the vision was to create and is to create public art that promotes community, fairness, equality, and accessibility, which sounds extremely similar to Nellie Bly's life. I took this vision mostly from Ray Oldenburg, who wrote this wonderful book called The Great Good Place. And he talks about great third place spaces. And I wanted the Girl Puzzle Monument honoring Nellie Bly to become a great third place space where everyone is welcome, where your economic and social status doesn't matter, where it fosters interaction and conversation, civil society, and where we really exceeded the ADA compliance. So the artistic process briefly is about conception, creation, and installation, all of this, you can study for 4 years in college, and we can't go over all of this, in one slide, but basically in public art, there are many other things involved, the engineering, footers, pathways, lighting, but the idea is to search for the inspiration that compelled someone to transcend their place in history, and to try to find glimpses of how that legacy can be conveyed through social media. So this is another one of those slides where, you can study for 4 years and get a college degree in metalwork and foundry. And this is 1% of the process, but basically, from clay to mold, from mold to wax, from wax to bronze, then fitting, welding, creating, transporting, installing on site, all of these steps are involved. The girl puzzle. Historically, the standard for a monument is honoring a person as a portrait, which is wonderful. We need that representation. But I really felt like Nellie Bly spoke about so many different people and types of people and categories of people. And I really wanted to express my vision of what she dedicated her life to, and the fact that she was a storyteller. And here we see a little bit of overlap with Rosemary. She was born into privilege. However, when her father died when she was 6 and she lost everything, her position in life changed. What was constant to her became a variable, and her perspective changed. And I talk about how her kinship broadened. She had only known one thing until everything had to change. And she and her mother had to work to survive. And throughout her life, I saw that she fought not only for her own right to survive, but for others and their right to survive as well. So of course, when she sees this article in the Pittsburgh Dispatch titled "What Girls Are Good For," in the article, Erasmus Wilson goes on a screed against working women and declares them a monstrosity. So she responds to this, and in a very bold and unvarnished way, she responds. Interestingly, she signs it "Lonely Orphan Girl." So she was very anonymous in the way that she responded. And as you know, they ended up hiring her to write for the paper. It was not too much longer after that she left to go to the New York World and work for Joseph Pulitzer. And just like Rosemary said, her first assignment was to go over to Blackwell Island and see what she really says that she was interested in seeing how people with mental illness were being treated. And during the process of her making her way, she was feigning insanity to be committed to the Blackwell Island Asylum. And she is very taken by people's faces. She's so intrigued. And she says that in the courtroom of New York, she can see poverty and hard lives written on people's faces who are in the courtroom. She later says that she's happy with the facial expressions that she was able to come up with to be committed, until she sees the distress on the faces of her companions who were also on the way to the island. Interestingly, the very first patient who she came in contact with in the asylum questioned her insanity and said that it could not be seen on her face. So I think what she determined was that not everyone there was there because of mental illness. There were many women there who were confined for lots of other reasons. And she found out that there were many more abuses being committed than just in the purview of being a patient in a hospital. She writes in 10 Days in a Madhouse, I determined then and there that I would try by every means to make my mission of benefit to my suffering sisters. And I thought this was interesting because, you know, we all know that Nellie Bly stepped into the lives of others, but by experiencing the plight and brokenness of others, I think this was really the catalyst on Blackwell Island, this connection to the island. This was the catalyst that shaped her life of advocacy and empathy for others. And this type of advocacy and empathy, I felt like was absolutely necessary to try to convey in the monument showing her legacy. So she gave a voice and a face to women who had no visibility and prominence in society. She literally and figuratively allowed women to inhabit new spaces. And I really wanted to follow her lead with the monument. While we were installing on Roosevelt Island, which was previously Blackwell Island, the Lily came to do a report. This is part of the Washington Post, and they captured these wonderful images of the Asian American face, which is inspired by my good friend's mother, Miyoko Chambliss. Interestingly, it was President Roosevelt who signed the executive order for Japanese Americans to be interned shortly after Pearl Harbor. And so in these images, they show us trying to position her face. She is the only one of the faces that is looking in a different direction. And that is because we wanted her to be facing the sculpture of Roosevelt on the south side of the island. Even though he spent his life atoning for that decision, I wanted it to be very obvious that both of these people are human beings and worthy of respect. So I thought it was wonderful that they were able to capture this. In the book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, I also found it interesting that Nellie Bly has signed her first published work, Lonely Orphan Girl. So it makes complete sense to me that the young orphaned girl in the asylum, that she would connect with her. And this young girl had been there for 4 years, but every morning she approached Nellie Bly and she said, I dreamed of my mother last night. I think she may come today and take me home. And I think Nellie Bly understood, she empathized, she understood the pain, but also the hopeful nature of this young girl. And then I also wanted to represent, there were so many older women who Nellie Bly wrote about. And she has a quote in the book that says, while I live, I hope. This reminded me of older women, but also of women who are members of the queer community. And, you know, old age is not guaranteed for anyone, but especially for members of the queer community who have a much shorter lifespan due to discrimination. Really, honestly, the 10 Days in a Madhouse was such a seminal and important work for Nellie Bly. And I read the descriptions. She gives these wonderful, multifaceted descriptions of the women whom she encountered. And these descriptions reminded me of so many women I know, even though this was written over 130 years ago. And I could just, I associated these stories with women who I knew who had suffered, who had been broken and repaired. And I wanted to represent this brokenness in the monument, but also the effort that it has taken for them to repair themselves. And I wanted to show a diverse cross-section of the women that Nellie Bly advocated for and bring it into the 21st century. So we understand that these are still issues that are important. And so these women who are represented there alongside Nellie Bly are also complicated, diverse, magnificent, wonderful women who I know, who represent so many facets of humanity, Asian, Black, young, old, immigrant, and queer identities. And then I wanted to, you know, on this image, you can see the three spheres that are in the middle. And a lot of people will ask me about that. Think of them as a word bubble. This is Nellie Bly's voice over time, and they increase in size to show the amplification of her voice. So she was so incredibly involved. She was a journalist, women's rights advocate, suffragist, war correspondent, inventor, patent holder, industrialist, world explorer. But underneath everything that Nellie Bly was, she was a humanitarian. You know, she has these famous quotes that people repeat all the time, even now. Here would be a good field for believers in women's rights. Yes, that's still so important. She famously said that she never had but one desire, and that was to benefit humanity. And she gave a voice and a face to women who had no visibility or prominence, but she also expanded her kinship. The more she was able to find common, you know, things in common, this fight for survival, her experience, and she overlapped with people in their experiences, and she found this kinship. She advocated for others as well. And I always say, with regard to Nellie Bly, we need more people like Nellie Bly. We need Nellie Blys in all fields who dare greatly, who speak truth to power, and who help dismantle systems of oppression. And we need to continue to proclaim loudly, just like Nellie Bly, that we all deserve equality in dignity and rights. And I really, truly think that is her message to the world, and is still very timely today.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you also to Rosemary. It's wonderful to hear both of your stories and your interpretations of Nellie's travels and Nellie's life. And may I ask if you have, if someone has comments or questions, go to reactions and raise your hand, and then we can call on you. And that would be the easiest way to, and we'll unmute, and you can get unmuted. Anyone have any questions? So. All quiet, shall come. Okay, Louise. Okay, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Louisa.
All right, how's that?
Okay.
Is that all right? Thank you for the presentations, and I particularly would like to ask Amanda, as a clay worker myself, how on earth you made those clay forms, and do you have a staff that helped you, or do you do all the clay work yourself to make the cartoon, the form? Can you elaborate without too much? Just elaborate a bit.
Sure. So I start with a maquette, which is a smaller version. And then we have it digitally, we capture it digitally and have it enlarged. And what you saw in that original image, those were actually, I think it's actually on the website, thegirlpuzzle.com. We have some of the video of the digitization of the faces, and then of this giant robotic arm that carves the rough, you know, it's the kind of the rough surface in foam, but it is high density foam. It's like ship dock foam. And then those are shipped. I thought that was interesting too, because that's literally what the foam is used for. And then those were shipped to us. And then I do put pretty much all of the clay on myself. My studio assistant, Roger, helps me sometimes. Miyoko, interestingly, is Roger's mother. So I, I have a close friendship with Roger and his mother Miyoko, who inspired the Japanese American face. But because they were so giant, we I had to have ladders. We had to bring in multiple ladders, and I would get up on this ladder and work. Well, you can't see what you're doing until you get back from it. So I jokingly said I was up and down the ladder 800 times a day, which was great exercise. And then I think we will post, I've just finished a really short 3-minute video that shows a lot of the project process. And it shows how we had to move these giant faces and lay them on their backs to do the molding process and the giant, molds and things. But I start with it small and then we enlarge it. And it's pretty much all me on the clay, but Roger does help some. He normally just makes sure I'm not going to fall off the ladder, which I'm known to do.
So interesting. Must take ages to dry them.
Well, the clay that I use is always malleable. It's an oil-based clay.
Okay.
So it never does set up, and that's on purpose because we want to take a mold of it. And then the mold has urethane rubber and then what we call a mother mold. So it holds the rubber in place for us to cast the waxes and make the wax replicas.
Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
And also Amanda did not tell us that they literally brought everything themselves to New York to put in and to install. It was amazing to watch all of this happening. Tom Heyer, unmute yourself, Tom.
Hello, I just wanted to, I don't actually have a specific question, but wanted to thank Rosemary and Amanda for being here tonight and helping to show us that history is not something sealed in amber and how we can still learn from it these days and how it can be translated into artwork and the beautiful monuments that we have now from Amanda on our island, and how that continues a conversation and that's really, really important. And I really appreciate you both being here tonight to be examples of how history is a living thing and it continues to answer questions.
That's wonderful, Tom, what you're saying. And I think these messages are really important. And I'm glad you got that message, those messages from what we both had to say, because one thing is that women are often hidden in history. And so there's a wonderful cartoon showing women being rescued from the dustbin of history. So we're trying, and that because their stories are very important, particularly now, I think, for everybody, but particularly for young women who are struggling with the pandemic and all kinds of things. So thank you very much. I think your comments were wonderful.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from here? Okay. Well, I want to tell you that it's inspiring because I've known about Nellie Bly since someone did a one-woman show here around when I first got to the island a long time ago. And we've always heard about Nellie Bly, and she's always been on our mind. We're very proud that we have all this study of her and study about her, how she thought of and how she was and all the things she did afterwards, that going around the world and being a journalist, being married, running this company in Brooklyn. And so, now Rosemary, you're going to be studying someone who went around England on a horse, Celia Fiennes. Give us a 10-second blurb on someone's travels from 1684 to 1712. Give us a tidbit of what you're working on.
See, that it just goes to show they're out there, but Celia Fiennes was hidden as well. I mean, I didn't even know about her. I wrote a piece for International Women's Day on, the most interesting female adventurers. I didn't even include her because I'd never heard of her. You just have to keep digging. Yes, she was able to travel because she was an aristocrat. She had the money and she had servants that went with her, but only 2. But she did it. She had to ride side saddle on a horse. Can you imagine? On roads that didn't really even exist. And she went and she wrote a diary of these travels, and she was highly interested in food, in spas. She liked to go to spas, but she wore lots of clothing when she went into the waters. She was intrigued by industry, and she wrote about that. Just like Nellie Bly, she had a huge curiosity and a lot of courage.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. We'll look forward to seeing you in New York when that book is released. Okay, Amanda, give us a preview of things to come. We know you're working on some very interesting projects.
Yes, several projects. So I'm working on finishing Sculptor, honoring the very first woman to be honored on public owned land in the state of Kentucky, in the history of the state of Kentucky, unbelievably. Nettie Depp, she was elected to public office 7 years before women earned the right to vote. She was a teacher, she was a principal, she was a suffragist, she was a school administrator. She was an amazing woman, and she will be the very first woman to stand in our Capitol in statuary in the history of the state. So other than that, I'm also beginning a new pretty giant monument, almost as big as the one on Roosevelt Island. It is a COVID memorial to the people who, not only the people who we have lost, but to the people who have stepped up to help others. And it's titled "United We Stand, Divided We Fall." We're just beginning that project. And interestingly, this ties back to Nellie Bly. I received an email from a gentleman in Arkansas last night, and he had seen the CBS feature of the girl puzzle, the national feature. And he and his wife flew to New York City to come to Roosevelt Island to see the monument because they saw this on CBS. He used to be the editor for the statewide newspaper in Arkansas and had been writing a story about the rower internment camp. And when he saw the feature that included Miyoko, in it, they flew there and took a bunch of images, and he has written a phenomenal article because the rower camp is getting ready to have its 80th birthday. And so this entire story of Nellie Bly, he has written a phenomenal article that will be featured this coming Sunday in their statewide paper in the state of Arkansas. So Nellie Bly and her advocacy and her legacy and her story and the connection to Roosevelt Island, continues on. It has this amazing arc, this amazing trajectory. And and it just swings like a pendulum. We see these atrocities occur, and then how many decades later do we see people trying to still atone for that? So there's still so much to learn, and Nellie Bly's voice continues to spread across the globe.
I thank you. Every day as new inquiries come to us. Someone wanted to know about their great-grandfather who passed away on the island the other day. And, we can only give them a little bit of information, but it's always amazing to find out the people. A woman who was a photographer in 1966 was just discovered. Her work was just discovered by another organization that's a nursing organization, and they want to publish her work. And that's one reason that we do this. This is one reason we do history. We do study things, and we do connect people with their history. We connect the islanders, and we connect many off-islanders. And I'm sure this spring we're going to have lots more visitors and lots more tours. It's just been so cold now to come see all the different sites on the island. And now we have new sites. We have a new South Point Park. We have the FDR Hope Memorial. We have the Lighthouse, which looks really pretty in back of the Nellie. I was on the ferry boat yesterday, and I could see the lighthouse is coming along, and the statues look great. So I think we're going to be attracting a whole new group of tourists to come and see different parts of the island. I just want to make a brief announcement. Our next program is 1 month from today. It's on March 15th, and her name is Jessica Klein, and she works for Wikimedia. Wikimedia is part of Wikipedia. And if you want to see famous pictures and by famous photographers that are not copyrighted, that are in the public domain, go on Wikimedia, because I just discovered it, that not every single picture is copyrighted and you can't use it. And Wikimedia is like Wikipedia. It's exposing all of this. I think they have 8 billion citations in it of artwork. And she's going to be discussing it and discussing how to improve our own Wikipedia pages. And then in April, we're going to go off to the main island. We're going to go to the South Street Seaport with an old friend, Bob Singleton. We're going to look at the river from the other side, from the Manhattan to us. And in May, our friend Rosanna Saluzzi is going to discuss the wildlife of Roosevelt Island, the four-legged wildlife of Roosevelt Island. So if you want to find out more about the Historical Society, go to RIHS.us on our website, and you can join us, and you can just send us an email with a comment or a question. Rosemary, do you have any parting words from late night in London?
I love to use the finish with the Nellie Bly quote, "Nothing is impossible if you put out the right amount of energy." And I think she lived that and believed it. And I think maybe now more than ever, we need that message. We're all a bit battered by COVID, and nothing is impossible. It still is not impossible if you really, really, really try. But I'd also like to say a big, giant thank you to you and Danielle and to all the lovely people who came to hear about Nellie Bly tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. What an honor and a pleasure to see this many people turn out and hear more about Nellie Bly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Danielle, where are you? I don't see you. Where's Danielle?
Where's Pat? Hi, Pat.
Here I am.
Okay, time to you lock the door, close the door, lock the door, get out of the library branch, which has been closed since 6 o'clock.
It's a little creepy when I'm by myself this late. Just like,
well, listen, there are no ghosts in the former asylum that I'm going to talk to you about, so don't worry. I thank everyone for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure. And we'll see you next month. And thanks again. Take care.
Good health and happiness to everyone.
Bye. Bye.
hi, thank you.